I was 38 years old when my husband sat across from me at our dinner table, looked me in the eyes, and told me he wanted a divorce so he could move to America and start a free life, without me. No argument, no warning, no conversation, just a decision he had already made, inside his own head, while I had spent 11 years believing we were building something together. He left. He actually left, packed his bags, signed the papers, boarded the flight, and disappeared into a life he chose over everything we had. And I was alone, in a small apartment with bare walls and no chair, and a silence so loud I could not sleep. What happened in the year that followed changed me in ways I am still understanding. I cried. I rebuilt. I discovered things about myself that marriage had kept carefully buried. I became someone I had never been given permission to be. And then, exactly 1 year later, there was a knock at my door. He was back, thinner, broken, afraid, standing in my hallway with an apology in his eyes and a question he did not yet have the courage to ask out loud. And I had to decide, not whether I still loved him, because that answer was complicated, but whether the woman I had become was willing to go back to the woman she used to be. This is that story. And the ending is not what anyone expected, including me. The dinner was getting cold on the table when he finally sat down across from me and said the words I never thought I would hear from the man I had spent 11 years of my life loving. Neha, I want a divorce. I remember staring at the dal that was still steaming, watching the small swirls of vapor disappear into the air of our kitchen in Jaipur, and thinking how strange it was that something so ordinary could still be happening in the same room where my entire world was collapsing. The ceiling fan was spinning. The neighbor's television was loud through the thin wall. A dog was barking somewhere down the street. Everything was exactly the same as it had always been, and yet nothing would ever be the same again. His name was Arjun Verma, my husband. The man who had held my hand at our wedding while the pandit chanted mantras and the sacred fire burned between us. The man who had promised, in front of our families and before God, that he would walk beside me through every season of this life. The man who was now sitting across from me with calm, decided eyes, telling me he had chosen a different road. I have been thinking about this for a long time, he said. I need to go to America, Neha. I have a job offer in New Jersey, a good one, software development. The salary is almost 6 times what I make here. I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. I need to go alone, he continued. I need to start fresh. I cannot do that if I am carrying the weight of a marriage that has been suffocating me. That word landed on my chest like a stone. Suffocating. 11 years of cooking his favorite meals, of ironing his shirts, of sitting up with him when he was sick, of cheering every small victory he achieved at work, of swallowing my own dreams so that his could have more room, and the word he had chosen to describe our marriage was suffocating. I was 37 years old. We had been married for 9 years. We had been together for 11. And in all of that time, not once had he told me he felt trapped. Not once had he said he was unhappy. Not once had he suggested that we talk to someone, or take a trip together, or try something different. He had simply decided, quietly, inside his own head, that he wanted to leave. And he had decided that the cleanest way to leave was to leave me. Is there someone else? I asked. My voice was steadier than I expected. No, he said. There is no one else. This is about me, about the life I want to build. The life we could build, I said. He looked at me then, and in his eyes I saw something that hurt more than anger would have. I saw pity. He pitied me. He pitied the woman who still believed in the life they had planned together. I don't want to take anyone with me, he said. I want to go alone. I want to be free. Free. Another word that cut, because what it meant, translated honestly, was that I was a cage, that our home was a cage, that everything I had given him, every ordinary and extraordinary day of a shared life, had been bars he had been quietly counting, waiting for the moment he could slip between them and disappear. I did not cry that night. I think I was too shocked to cry. I sat at that table for a long time after he went to the bedroom, staring at the cold dale and the untouched rice, and I tried to understand how a person could share a bed with someone for 9 years and still feel that alone. The weeks that followed were a kind of quiet horror. We lived in the same apartment while the paperwork moved through its process, and we spoke to each other with the careful politeness of strangers. He slept on the couch. I kept cooking, which I understand now was strange, but it was the only ritual I had left. Every morning I made chai. Every evening I made dinner. He would take his plate and sit in the small living room, and we would exist in the same space without really being in the same space at all. My mother called every day. I did not tell her what was happening for the first 2 weeks. She was 63 and had a heart condition, and I did not know how to say the words without them breaking something inside her that could not be repaired. But eventually, she heard it in my voice, the way mothers always do, and she asked me directly, and I told her, and she cried in a way that made me feel guilty, as though the failure of my marriage was something I had done to her. My father said very little. He drove the 4 hours from Ajmer to Jaipur the next day, sat with me at the same table where Arjun had delivered his verdict, drank his chai without speaking for a long time, and then said, "You will survive this. Not that it would be okay. Not that Arjun was wrong, or that I deserved better, or that everything happens for a reason. Just, you will survive this." And somehow, coming from my father, those 4 words were the most honest comfort anyone could have offered me. I had worked as a teacher at a private school in Jaipur for 7 years, teaching English literature to children between the ages of 12 and 15. It was work I loved, even on the days it exhausted me. But my salary was modest, and we had always lived on the understanding that Arjun's income was the spine of our household. When the divorce was finalized, I would be moving out of our apartment and into something much smaller, built on a salary that had never needed to carry everything before. The divorce was finalized on a Tuesday morning in February. I remember the date because it was cold in a way that Jaipur rarely is, and I had worn a shawl that my grandmother had given me years before, a deep blue wool shawl with small embroidered flowers at the edges, and I had worn it because I needed something of hers with me in that room, something old, something that had survived. Arjun and I stood before the magistrate, and we signed what needed to be signed, and we did not look at each other. His lawyer said something. My lawyer responded. There was a small procedural delay about a document that needed to be initialed in a different place, and then it was done. 9 years. Initialed in a different place. Done. He left for New Jersey 3 weeks later. I know this because his mother, who had been kind to me throughout the marriage, and who I believe was ashamed of what her son had done, called me the morning of his departure. She did not say much. She said she was sorry. She said she hoped I would be well. She said she would always think of me as her daughter. I thanked her, and I meant it, and after I hung up the phone, I finally cried. Not for Arjun, for her. For the mother-in-law who had welcomed me into her home with open arms, and who was now losing a daughter-in-law, because her son had decided that the dream of America was worth more than the woman who had loved him faithfully for 11 years. That night, alone in my new small apartment, 2 rooms, a bathroom, a kitchen barely wide enough to turn around in, I sat on the floor because I had not yet bought a proper chair, and I looked at the bare walls, and I thought, this is the beginning. I did not feel like it was the beginning. It felt like rubble, but I said it out loud to the empty room because I had read somewhere that the body believes what the voice speaks, and I was willing to try anything. This is the beginning, I said. The walls said nothing back, but I kept going. The first month alone was the hardest thing I have ever lived through. And I say that as someone who has since survived things I never imagined I would have to survive. It was not the loneliness that broke me the most, though the loneliness was profound and heavy in a way I had not anticipated. It was the silence. In 9 years of marriage, even the difficult years, even the years when Arjun and I had little to say to each other, there had always been the background noise of another human being. Footsteps, the sound of water running, a cough in another room, the particular way someone breathes when they are sleeping beside you. All of that was gone, and the absence of it was so loud it kept me awake most nights. I had moved into the small apartment in the Vaishali Nagar neighborhood, close enough to my school that I could walk on mornings when the weather allowed. The apartment was on the 2nd floor of a building owned by a widow named Mrs. Saxena, who was 71 years old and had sharp eyes and an even sharper tongue, but who left a small container of khichdi outside my door on my 3rd night there without any explanation, and who I came to understand was performing kindness in the only language she had ever been taught, which was the language of food offered without ceremony. I did not tell my colleagues at school what had happened right away. I am a private person by nature, and there is a particular cruelty in the way that divorce becomes public property in a community like ours, where everyone has an opinion and no one has been asked for one. But teachers notice things. We are trained to read the room, to catch the child who is struggling before they fall, and so my colleagues read me the way I had taught them to read their students. My friend Kavri, who taught mathematics and had been my closest companion at school for 5 years, was the first to sit beside me in the staff room one afternoon and say nothing at all, just sit there with her hand close to mine on the table, making herself available without making demands. That kind of friendship is rare. I have never forgotten it. The children help too, in ways they will never know. When I stood in front of my classroom every morning, I had to be present. I had to be the person they needed me to be. A 12-year-old who is trying to understand why Atticus Finch does what he does, or what the green light at the end of Desi's dock really means, does not have space in her attention for her teacher's private grief, and that is exactly as it should be. So for 6 hours a day, 5 days a week, I was Ms. Verma, and Ms. Verma was composed and warm and certain. And sometimes the act of performing a version of yourself that you want to become is the first step toward actually becoming her. It was around the 6th week after the divorce that I made the first deliberate decision of my new life. I signed up for an online course. It was a certification program in educational leadership and curriculum design, offered through a university in Delhi, and it cost me an amount of money that made me anxious when I entered my card details, but I entered them anyway. I had always wanted to move into school administration to have more influence over how children were being taught and what they were being taught to value. But during my marriage, I had let that ambition sit quietly in a corner, feeding it occasionally with daydreams, but never with action. Arjun had not discouraged me, but he had not encouraged me either, and somehow his indifference had become my permission to stay still. Now, there was no indifference to hide behind. There was only me and the blank space of a future that had not yet been written. The course met online every Saturday morning and required reading and assignments throughout the week. It was demanding on top of my full teaching load, and there were nights when I fell asleep at my small desk with my laptop still open and pages of notes spread beneath my cheek, and woke at 2 a.m. stiff and disoriented. But I did not stop. Something had ignited in me, some necessary anger that had been looking for a productive direction, and the studying gave it one. Every assignment I completed felt like a small declaration. Every grade I received felt like evidence. Evidence that I was capable. Evidence that I had been capable all along. My mother visited in March, taking the bus from Ajmer on her own despite her knee pain, and she stayed for 11 days. She slept in my bed, and I slept on the floor on a mattress I borrowed from Mrs. Saxena, and we stayed up too late every night talking in the way we had not talked since I was a young woman living at home. She told me things about her own marriage that she had never told me before. Small difficulties and adjustments and moments of doubt that she had navigated quietly over the decades. And I understood that she was not comparing her experience to mine, but offering it as proof that women carry more than anyone knows, and carry it with more grace than they are ever given credit for. She also told me that I needed to eat more, that my face was too thin, and that I should put some oil in my hair. These were not metaphors. She meant them literally. And there was something deeply comforting about being mothered on that level, about someone caring whether your hair was dry. It was during her visit that I heard from Arjun for the first time since he had left. He sent a message through his cousin, which I found cowardly, asking whether I was doing well and whether I had received a certain document related to a shared bank account that needed to be formally closed. I sent the document. I did not ask how he was doing. His cousin relayed that things in New Jersey were going well, that Arjun was settling in, that the job was good. I received this information the way you receive news about a country you have visited once and do not plan to visit again. Noted. Irrelevant to my current itinerary. My mother watched me read the message, and she watched me set down the phone, and she said nothing, which was exactly the right thing to say. By April, I had bought a proper chair. This sounds like a small thing, but it was not. The chair was wooden, with a cushioned seat in a deep green fabric, and I had seen it in a shop window on my walk home from school, and had gone inside and sat in it and decided, standing up again, that I deserved a chair I had chosen for myself. I carried it home in pieces in a shared auto, because it would not fit any other way, and I assembled it on my kitchen floor, using the included instructions and a determination that was slightly out of proportion to the task. And when it was done, I sat in it at my table and drank my chai and felt, for the first time in months, that I was exactly where I was supposed to be. The certification course ended in June with a final project that I had worked on for 6 weeks, a complete curriculum redesign proposal for a fictional middle school with a focus on critical thinking and emotional literacy. My evaluator gave me the highest mark in my cohort. She sent a personal note with the results saying that my proposal demonstrated both rigor and genuine empathy for students, and that I should consider applying for a leadership position within the year. I printed that note and put it on the wall above my desk, the first thing I had put on the walls. I called my father that evening. He picked up on the second ring, the way he always does. "I got the highest mark," I said. There was a pause, and then, "Of course you did." That was all. "Of course you did." And I held the phone for a long time after we said goodbye, pressing it gently against my chest in the dark, because those 3 words contained everything my father had always believed about me and had never quite known how to say. I was 38 years old. I was alone. I had a small apartment and a new chair and a certification and a note on my wall. I had students who needed me and a friend named Kaveri who sat beside me without asking for explanations, and a landlady who left khichdi outside my door when she thought I needed it. I was not the woman Arjun had left. I was not her at all. I was becoming someone I had not yet met, and for the first time since that cold February morning when I had stood in a magistrate's office and signed my name on the line that ended a chapter, I was genuinely curious about who she would turn out to be. I did not know then that in 6 months there would be a knock at my door. I did not know then what that knock would cost me to answer. I heard the knock on a Thursday evening in late August, just as the monsoon was beginning to loosen its grip on the city, and the air outside was carrying that particular smell of wet earth and jasmine that I have always associated with the end of something and the beginning of something else. I was sitting at my green chair, grading essays my students had written about identity and belonging, a topic I had chosen for reasons that were not entirely academic, when the sound came at my door. I was not expecting anyone. Kaveri had messaged earlier to say she was tired and would call tomorrow. My mother had called in the afternoon, and we had already spoken for almost an hour. Mrs. Saxena rarely knocked after 7 in the evening. So I set down the essays with a mild curiosity and walked the 6 steps it took to cross my small apartment, and opened the door without any particular preparation for what I was about to find on the other side of it. Arjun was standing in the hallway. He looked different, thinner, in a way that was not healthy. His hair, which he had always kept neatly trimmed, was longer and slightly unkempt, and there were shadows beneath his eyes that spoke of sleep that had not come easily for a long time. He was wearing a jacket that was too heavy for the Jaipur weather, the kind of jacket you pack for a cold climate and forget to leave behind when you return. And he was holding a small bag in his left hand, and he was looking at me with an expression I had never seen on his face before in all the years I had known him. He looked afraid. "Neha," he said. I stood in the doorway, and I did not move, and I did not speak, because every single cell in my body needed a moment to process the information that the man who had signed divorce papers and flown to New Jersey to build his free life was now standing in the hallway of my apartment building in Jaipur with shadows under his eyes and a jacket that belonged to another season. "Can I come in?" he asked. "No," I said. And then, because I was not cruel even then, "What are you doing here, Arjun?" He set the bag down on the floor beside his feet. He pressed his hands together briefly, a gesture I recognized as the one he made when he was gathering himself to say something difficult. I had watched him make that gesture before job interviews, before difficult phone calls with his father, before any conversation that required him to be honest about something he would have preferred to leave unexamined. "I came back," he said. "I can see that. I came back because I was wrong." He said it quietly, without drama. And I think the absence of drama was the thing that surprised me most. I had imagined this moment in the way you imagine things you tell yourself you are not imagining. And in my imagination, he had been either defensive or theatrical. The quiet was harder to handle than either of those would have been. I was wrong about everything, about the job, about America, about what I thought I needed, and I was wrong about you, about us. I leaned against the doorframe because my legs were not entirely steady, and I did not want him to see that. What happened? I asked. He told me, standing in the hallway because I did not invite him in. And I will relay what he said, not because it excuses anything, but because it is part of the story, and the story deserves to be told completely. The job in New Jersey had been real, and for the first 3 months, it had been everything he had imagined. Good salary, interesting work, a shared apartment with 2 other Indian men he had found through a community group online, the feeling of possibility that comes with being new somewhere and not yet knowing what you do not know. But then the company had gone through a restructuring in the spring, and his position, along with 11 others, had been eliminated. He had spent 2 months looking for another role, while his savings drained at a rate that American cities demand without apology. The shared apartment had become tense when money was short and proximity was long. He had applied for more than 60 positions. He had received 4 interviews. He had received no offers. I was alone, he said. I was completely alone, and I realized that I had thrown away the only person who had ever actually known me, and I had thrown her away because I confused wanting to escape with wanting to grow. Those are not the same thing. I know that now. I was quiet for a moment. Outside, somewhere below the window at the end of the hallway, a child was laughing at something, the pure, uncomplicated laughter of someone who has not yet learned that the world is complicated. "Where are you staying?" I asked. "With my parents. I arrived 2 days ago." He paused. "I wanted to see you right away, but my mother told me to wait at least 1 day, to let myself arrive before I came to you." His mother, of course. The woman who had called me the morning he left and told me she would always think of me as her daughter. "She knows you're here?" I asked. "She encouraged me to come. She said I owed you more than a phone call." I looked at him for a long moment. The man I had loved for 11 years. The man who had sat across from me at a dinner table and told me our marriage was suffocating him. The man who had signed his name beside mine on a document that had taken 9 years apart in a single morning. He was thinner and tired and afraid, and he was standing in my hallway with a heavy jacket and an empty bag and the kind of face a person wears when they have traveled a very long distance to arrive at the truth and are not sure the truth will let them in. I felt something. I want to be honest about that, because dishonesty about the interior life would make this a lesser story than it is. I felt something when I saw him. Not love exactly, or not love the way it had been, but something in the neighborhood of love, some old muscle memory of caring, the way your hand reaches for a light switch in a room you have not lived in for months, because your body remembers even when your mind has moved on. But I also felt something else, something that had not been there before, and that I recognized as the product of a very particular year. I felt solid. I felt the firmness of the floor beneath my feet, and the firmness of the doorframe beneath my hand, and the firmness of a self that had been reconstructed, carefully and at considerable cost, from the rubble of the night he had chosen America over me. "Arjun," I said, "I am going to ask you to go home tonight." He absorbed this. "Not because I am punishing you," I continued, "but because this is not a conversation I am able to have at my door on a Thursday evening without any warning. You made a decision that changed my entire life in the space of a dinner. You can give me more than 30 seconds to respond to your arrival." He nodded slowly. "Can I call you?" "You can call me," I said. "In a few days." He picked up his bag. He looked at me one more time. And in his eyes, I saw something that I had not seen there in a very long time. Something I had stopped looking for so gradually that I had not noticed when I stopped. He saw me. Not the wife, not the household, not the comfortable arrangement of a shared life. He saw Neha. And the tragedy of it, the particular heartbreak of that moment, was that it had taken losing me completely for him to finally learn how to look. "You seem different," he said softly. "I am," I said. I closed the door gently because I was not angry, and I walked back to my green chair, and I sat down, and I placed my hands flat on the table on either side of the ungraded essays, and I breathed, in and out, in and out. Then I picked up the phone and called Kaveri. "I thought you were tired," I said when she answered. I am. What happened? Arjun came back. Silence. Then, are you okay? I considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. I think so, I said. But I need to tell someone, and you are the someone I need. I am making chai, she said. Come over. I put on my shoes. I wrapped my grandmother's blue shawl around my shoulders because the August night had a new coolness to it that I had not expected, the first whisper of a season changing. I turned off the light in my apartment. I locked the door behind me, and I went to my friend because I had learned in this year of reconstruction that knowing who to call and having someone to call are two of the most important things a person can build, and I had built both. The question of Arjun was waiting for me. It would still be waiting tomorrow and the day after. But tonight I needed Kaveri's chai and my grandmother's shawl and the steady ground beneath my own feet. And for the moment, that was exactly enough. Kaveri opened her door before I even knocked, the way she always did when she knew I was coming, and she pulled me inside without ceremony and sat me down at her kitchen table and placed a cup of chai in front of me that was already made, which told me she had started brewing it the moment we hung up the phone. That is the kind of friend she was. The kind who prepares before you arrive so that when you do, there is already something warm waiting. I told her everything. From the moment I heard the knock to the moment I closed the door, she listened without interrupting, which is rarer than it sounds. And when I finished, she wrapped both hands around her own cup and was quiet for a moment before she spoke. What do you want to do? She asked. Not what should you do. Not what does he deserve. Not what will people say. What do you want to do? I had chosen my friends well this year, even if I had not chosen them consciously. And in that moment I understood that the quality of the people around you is a form of self-knowledge, because you let in what you believe you are worth. I don't know yet, I said honestly. That is a completely acceptable answer, Kaveri said. I stayed at her apartment until almost midnight, and we talked about other things too, about a student of mine who was struggling, and a colleague of hers who was difficult, and a film we had both watched recently and found ourselves unexpectedly moved by. And the ordinariness of that conversation, after the enormity of what had happened at my door, was exactly the medicine I needed. Life continuing, the world not stopping. The proof that I existed in a context larger than Arjun's return. I called him 4 days later. We agreed to meet at a cafe near the old city, a neutral place, public, with enough ambient noise to keep the conversation from becoming too large for its container. I arrived first and chose a table near the window and ordered water and waited. And I spent those few minutes of waiting doing something I had been doing a great deal in the past year, which was simply being honest with myself about what I was feeling. What I was feeling was complicated. I want to be very clear about this because I think there is a version of this story that flattens a woman into either the fool who takes him back or the hero who refuses, and real life, real women, real feelings do not flatten that easily. I had loved Arjun. I had loved him genuinely, and for a long time, and with the full investment of someone who believed in the life they were building together. That love did not vanish because he had hurt me. Love does not work like a light switch, and anyone who has ever truly loved someone knows that to be true. But I had also spent a year learning the difference between loving someone and needing them, between wanting a person in your life and being unable to imagine your life without them. Those are entirely different things, and the year had taught me to tell them apart. He arrived a few minutes after me, and he looked slightly better than he had at my door, as though a few nights of sleep in his childhood home had returned something to him. He sat down carefully, ordered chai, and looked at me the way someone looks at a thing they are afraid of damaging with too direct a gaze. We talked for 2 hours. He told me more about the year, the loneliness of a foreign city where you know no one, and the work that was supposed to validate the sacrifice is suddenly gone. The particular shame of calling his parents and admitting that the dream had not held the shape he had given it. The nights he had sat in that New Jersey apartment looking at photographs on his phone and understanding, gradually, that the feeling he was experiencing was not the clean freedom he had imagined, but a profound and unearned emptiness. I thought about you every day, he said. I thought about you too, I said, for the first few months, less after that. He absorbed this. I kept thinking about the dinner, he said. The night I told you. The dal was getting cold, and you were just looking at it, and I kept thinking how, even in that moment, you were not cruel to me. You asked one question, and when I answered it, you accepted my answer. You did not scream or threaten or break things. You just went quiet. And I told myself that quietness meant you were okay, that you were resilient, that you would be fine. But what I know now is that I told myself that because it made it easier to leave. I looked at him across the table. I was not okay, I said. I was devastated. I just did not devastate in a way that was visible to you because I had spent 9 years learning that my feelings were not the priority in that room. The words came out more clearly than I had expected, without bitterness and without performance, just as a statement of fact. And I watched them land on him the way true things land, with a weight that cannot be argued with. He did not argue. He nodded slowly, and he looked at the table and he said, "I know, and I am sorry. I am more sorry than I have words for." I believed him. That is the thing I need to say clearly. I believed that he was sorry. The apology was not the performance of remorse, but the real thing. The kind that comes from having lived inside the consequences of your choices and found them unbearable. He had gone to America looking for freedom and found only the hollow echo of a life that had been built on the wrong foundation. And he had come home carrying the full weight of understanding exactly what he had discarded. But here is what the year had taught me, the most important lesson of all the lessons, the one I want to write in large letters on every wall of every room where women are being asked to forgive men who chose to leave. Being sorry is real, and forgiveness is possible, and neither of those things means that the thing that was broken can be rebuilt into the same shape it held before. I was not the same woman he had left. I was not the woman who had sat at a dinner table watching the dal go cold and had quietly absorbed a verdict she had not been consulted on. I was a woman who had walked herself through the rubble of a demolished life and had built something new from the stones, something that fit her actual shape rather than the shape someone else had decided she should fill. I had a certification on my wall and a green chair I had chosen for myself, and a friendship with Kaveri that I had deepened through honest need, and a relationship with my own reflection that for the first time in many years I was not afraid to look at directly. And I knew, sitting across from Arjun in that cafe, with the old city noise coming through the window and the chai cooling between his hands, that bringing him back into my life would require me to renegotiate everything I had just finished building. Not because he was a bad man. He was not a bad man. He was a man who had made a terrible decision and suffered its consequences and grown from them. And growth is real, and it matters. But the question was never whether he had changed. The question was who I had become. I reached across the table, and I placed my hand briefly over his, not as a promise, but as a goodbye to the version of us that could have been. And I said what I had known since the night he appeared in my hallway, but had needed these 4 days and 2 hours to find the exact and true words for. "Arjun," I said, "I forgive you. I want you to know that clearly and without condition. I forgive you for the dinner, and for the paperwork, and for the words suffocating, and for leaving me to rebuild a life you demolished without asking whether I wanted it demolished. I forgive you because I refuse to carry resentment for the rest of my own life as a consequence of a choice you made. But forgiveness is not the same as returning, and I am not returning." He was very still. "I have built something this year," I continued, "something that belongs entirely to me, and I have learned that I am capable of a life that I had never been allowed to fully imagine when I was inside our marriage. I do not want to give that back, not for anyone, not even for you." He looked at me for a long time, and I saw the grief move through him, clean and honest, and I did not look away from it because I respected him enough to witness what my answer cost him. "Is there nothing?" he asked, and his voice was very quiet. "There is everything," I said. "There is my forgiveness, which is real. There is my wish that you find what you are actually looking for, which is sincere. There is the memory of 11 years that I will not dishonor by pretending they did not matter. But there is no us, Arjun. That door closed from the inside, and I am the one who closed it, and I am at peace with that." He nodded. He looked out the window. He drank the last of his chai. We parted on the street outside the cafe with the kind of gentleness that is only possible between people who have loved each other honestly and hurt each other honestly, and have arrived, finally, at a place beyond both. He walked one direction, and I walked another, and I did not look back. Not because looking back was forbidden, but because there was simply nothing behind me that I needed to see. That evening, I sat in my green chair, and I looked at the note on my wall, and the certificate beside it, and the small photograph of my parents that I had framed and hung between them, and I thought about all the versions of myself that this year had required me to become in order to arrive at the one who was sitting here now. Then I opened my laptop, because there was a new opportunity I had been considering for several weeks, a leadership position at a school in Pune that would have been unimaginable to the woman who had sat at a dinner table in February watching the dal go cold. I began to write my application. Outside, the last of the monsoon was releasing the city, and the air smelled of ending and beginning, and I breathed it in deeply, all of it, and I began.